If you're like me, and you got no life and there's nowhere to go, then tune in to the Animation Truman Show. You'll be glad you did.
And I am live. Well, here's the show. Here's the shot I've been working on. And there's the rest of it. Okay, and so the question today, to a degree, is what I'm going to share today going to be some of the most important advice I've ever shared on my channel? And it might be. Now I'm going to jump to my YouTube channel before I do anything and make sure, yeah, it looks like I'm live. I just want to make sure it didn't turn out to be an unlisted video. So let me jump back to Krita. And hello, Maria. Okay, so this shot, we spent 5 sessions in Blender, and that got us to this point. Okay, and in the process of doing that, of course, a lot of people are asking me questions on the live stream, like, you know, are you going over to Blender now instead of Krita, Tahoma, blah, blah, blah. And those are fair questions. Those are fair questions. Well, let's look at where this shot evolved to and do a little bit of a breakdown to kind of show why I landed back in Krita. So there's really 2 things to look at here. One is what I'm referring to as being important advice, has to do with mindset, and then of course there's all the details of what actually was involved in getting the shot finished up. Probably the latter is less important. For the people who are here, who are trying to learn animation and maybe struggling with the tools to some degree, that's where the advice part comes in. So I think I want to start there. When I got to the point, let me put it this way. This shot is not necessarily one of the best shots in the show. It's pretty good, okay? But it certainly is one of the most complicated, okay? Mainly because there's a lot of, if you think about the elements in this shot as being objects, let's say, you know, you have Mel, you have the bowls, you have the background, you have the different pieces of Mel, such as his arms and his head. What makes a shot like this extra complicated is the fact that there are objects in the scene that are both in front of and behind my character. Okay, so the bowls are between his 2 arms, and clearly there's a pretty complex overlap that's greatly aggravated by the fact that the bowls element is moving. Okay, so I mean, I will just say, for me, as someone who's trying to crank out the material, this is an extremely complicated shot. Now, it's not, I wouldn't say for me extremely difficult. It isn't difficult, but it is complex, and because it's complex, there were a lot of steps required to get it to the point where the shot was, you know, essentially acceptable. So I think I want to start on the question of mindset, and I'll just let this, you know, loop a little bit. The question I asked myself while I was off running some other errands today that have nothing to do with animation was, how would a seasoned expert animator, you know, maybe working on a team for a direct to Amazon Prime cartoon or something like that, or Netflix or whatever, pick your favorite platform, how would that seasoned animator look at this work? And importantly, how would they not look at this work? If you think about it, on the one hand, they wouldn't be worried. Okay, they're not going to worry. They're not going to do two things. They're not going to hurry, and they're not going to worry. Why? Well, they're not going to worry because the seasoned animator knows his tools and says, his or her tools, and says, I know that while this particular shot may be a bit of a pain in the rump, it's not as if I'm not going to succeed. It's not as if I won't get it done, and one way or another will make it work. And of course, the seasoned animator is going to view it that way, especially if they are on a team, because there really is no other option. You're going to lose your job if you don't deliver a result that's at least, on par with the expectations, creatively, aesthetically, etc., for that show, stylistically. So he's not going to be worried. He's not going to worry about whether he'll succeed, and therefore, the seasoned animator doesn't have the emotional maelstrom of getting partway into it and then for whatever reason either getting frustrated, discouraged, or basically lose their confidence that they're going to be able to deliver the goods such that they basically quit. Okay? And I point that out because if you're not a seasoned animator and you don't know your tools that well, and you're looking at Krita and you're looking at Blender and you're looking at Tahoma and you're saying, oh, what's the right tool? Because I want the magical tool that's going to make it possible for me to realize my vision. The reality is that all of them are that tool, and they all have their shortcomings and they all have their benefits, their strengths and their weaknesses. The far more important thing than the choice of the tool is the mindset. So on the one hand, as I said, you're not going to worry because you're a seasoned animator. You know you're going to get the job done. Well, on the other hand, you're also not going to hurry. And what do I mean by hurry? I have a very specific thing that I mean by that. Okay. When I talk about hurry, what I mean is, and it's especially aggravated when you don't know your tools that well. You saw it with me over the last several sessions when I was doing this shot in Blender because I was reacquainting myself with Blender and the grease pencil and its particular set of strengths and weaknesses and quirks. And when you hurry, what I'm saying is you're eager to have the emotional payoff or dividend, let's call it, of some sort of finished result that makes you emotionally say, I did this. It worked. To a degree you get excited about your own ability, to a degree you get excited about the tool that you're using. But either way, it's the emotional dividend of getting some finished result. But there's something you have to really consider that the seasoned animator doesn't really have to deal with, which is the neophyte, the beginner, is pretty easily impressed. The beginner just making something move across the screen when they're first, dipping their toes in the pool and experiencing what can be done with the tools, just moving stuff around is like exciting, right? We've all experienced that. But the problem is that, and this is a problem that we have here perennially when we deal with trying to produce this type of work in a community or a climate that's essentially consists largely of beginners. And what I'm getting at is that you can deliver a result that gets you some kudos, on YouTube or Discord, gets you a lot of attaboys in your live stream chat, hey, that looks great, or whatever, that's kind of what it's part of what you're shooting for. The seasoned animator really isn't shooting for that, because what gets you those kudos in this climate is a level of work that would never even be even close to acceptably, not acceptable at all in the real world. So there's a real disconnect between what we're going to experience here amongst beginners, and while we're still learning our tools and learning our craft, that runs a very real risk of actually being extremely counterproductive in our development as storytellers. At the end of the day, that's all we care about, actually. if you don't care mainly and, by far about telling stories effectively, then essentially you're kidding yourself. Because any fool can open up Blender or Krita or Tahoma and find a way, within one day, you can sort of figure out how to make things jump around the screen. Well, whoop-de-doo. And a lot of us don't get much farther than that. Or, a lot of people who dip their toes in this particular pool. And so it's really good to ask yourself about the mindset that the seasoned animator would have. Because he's not going to hurry, because you look at a shot like this and you go, okay, I can see there are a lot of things I have to do. I see that the arms, the body of the character was animated, but somehow we got to find a way to get the bowls in between the two arms, overlapping his body, overlapping his left arm, but yet behind his right arm. And that's just one example. And then there's the cast shadows of the bowls, for example. How do you do that? And maybe you don't have to be a particularly seasoned animator to be able to creatively envision that that's what you might want to do. So then we're always on this tightrope between what we are creatively able to think of doing in the first place and what we're logistically able to actually accomplish, which is limited. So the first is limited more by our experience. It's more limited by what we take in, how critically we look at the shows we like, for example, and we really think about, well, how did they do that? The latter is throttled or limited by our knowledge of the tools at hand, such that we're able to employ those tools to get the result we're after. And we're all in a continuum. When you're a beginner, just moving something across the screen gives you that little psycho-emotional dividend. Whoa, that's cool. But you're not even in the pool. You're not even in the game. You haven't even begun to learn to do what you would have to do to actually compete in the real world creating this stuff. And that's okay. That's a perfectly fine place to be. Everybody has to start there. Right? So that's not a criticism. For me, I have the same vulnerabilities. The main difference for a guy like me would be that what it takes to impress me and give me that, that sort of endorphin or that dopamine hit, that attaboy, or that, and it could come from outside from other people, or it could come internally from myself, right? It doesn't really matter because it's the same thing that's happening psycho-emotionally. So it takes a little more to impress me than it might take to impress you. But it's the same dynamic, and it's the same vulnerability. So I'm just as guilty. So the advice is, no matter what you're trying to accomplish, I guess I have two, as Arnold Schwarzenegger would say, advices. One is the advice that I gave to, I gave it to Amar the other day, and I gave it to Goswami, which was that if you want to know what you should be doing, just go look at the show you like. Go look at something that you think is cool, and then that's your standard. There is no other standard. Now, of course, there's a wide range of standards, because in the media that you enjoy, there are lots of different, there's a big difference between South Park and One Punch Man. They're two completely different, and both are acceptable. Both have proven that level of, let's call it performance in terms of craft and storytelling, animation, whatever. There's a wide range of things that have shown to be, viable standards in the marketplace. So you can take your pick. It's okay to chase whatever turns you on, But for most people, the real world is the best place to start in terms of the stuff you enjoy watching, because that tells you what you're aiming at. That gives you, and what happens then is the natural, difficult process of copying something that you enjoy forces you, in other words, you have no idea what the lessons are you're going to learn in the process of solving that problem. You have no idea. And this shot was the same way, where I actually got to a point after the Blender part where, number one, I really couldn't fully know what the challenges would be to get the shot finished. I really couldn't. I am not good enough to have foreseen all of the possible gotchas. Okay? If I'm the neophyte guy, that disappoints me. Now, really think about what I'm saying here. If I'm the neophyte, that disappoints me. Because I get into it, and then what happens is I discover there's a challenge or a difficulty that I did not foresee, and now I'm mad at myself, or I'm disappointed, or I'm mad at the software, because of this, the stupid way. And I've certainly been guilty of ranting about software at different times. The seasoned animator wouldn't be disappointed. He'd just say, oh, okay, I didn't see that coming. I guess I need to change my strategy. And that's it. It's not emotional. It's just because I have a job. I'm being paid. I'm being paid. It's okay, fine. You made a mistake. Fix it. Do whatever you have to do, but fix it. It's not optional. So it's a completely different mindset. So on the side of the coin that involves developing your craft and learning and being able to envision what you're even trying to do, that's where copying and looking at the good stuff that you enjoy watching is really important, because because you don't know the tools and you don't have the experience of creating 1,000 animated scenes. You don't have that experience. There's no way you could ever be expected to have the breadth of creative ability to envision a result when you're new to the craft or new to the tools. But what you can do is you can look at something you like and you can start to ask good questions. You say, well, how did they do that? It's what we saw last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, when we were looking at Castlevania, sort of informing to some degree the work that Amar was going to do. I just looked at their trailer and I said, well, okay, what do I see? What did they do? What do I think they did? I don't know what they did, but I can guess. Okay? And so you're either at the point where you have to figure everything out by trial and error, or you're at the point where you have to figure some things out by trial and error. I'm a guy who pretty much has to figure some things out by trial and error. You might be a person who's at the point where you have to pretty much figure everything out by trial and error. It doesn't matter. It's the same problem. So, as I said, on the one side of the coin is where do you, when you're a beginner, where do you develop your lexicon of techniques? Where do you get the tubes of paint you put on your palette to decide what colors you're going to mix, right? Where do you get that? Well, the only place you can get that is the same place everyone does when they start out, which is there was something you watched that you liked. And then if you're like me, you start, I can't help watching something and saying to myself, geez, how did they do that? I can't help it. It's 100% of the time. I can't even watch a show without thinking about how they did what they did. But that's me, and not everybody's that way. The other side of the coin is when you're actually into it and you're actually trying to do serious problem solving. All of the things that slow us down and stop us from just churning forward and getting the job done at that high level that we're aiming at, 99% of that is emotional. It has nothing to do with the shortcomings of the tools. It has to do with all the time we waste being disappointed and kicking ourselves. And it's all useless. At the end of the day, the only question that really actually matters, and certainly you'll agree with me that the only thing the marketplace cares about, is what's the final result look like. It's the only thing that matters, because frankly, the market doesn't even know who you are. They have no idea who you even are. All they care about is they either enjoy the show or they don't, or the speed paint, or the YouTube short, or the TikTok video, whatever it is, doesn't matter. Either it entertains people or they don't. Now, I'm gonna dovetail a little bit into why the psycho-emotional part of it is so important to understand. Psychologists, psychiatrists, so-called experts who talk about the dopamine reward system in our brains. This is, and by the way, if you're a creative person, this is probably really important for you to listen to. This is really important to understand. Because those who claim to be experts, and they're pretty much experts, okay, but I think there's sometimes some holes in the explanation of what's going on because there's things that they haven't yet discovered. Okay, I know that sounds like gobbledygook. Let me explain what I mean. Right now, it's in vogue to be concerned about that dopamine hit. In other words, we're doing social media, and we're on Facebook, and we're wasting a lot of time on TikTok or whatever, and we're getting this dopamine hit when we are entertained or somebody responds. We get some likes to a post, whatever that is. Okay, and so the psychologists today are saying, oh, this is really bad because of what actually happens physically in the brain with that dopamine system. I think it's important, though. If you think about it, that dynamic is demonstrably true. However, it isn't actually just the process of engaging with things that potentially give you a dopamine hit that is the problem. It's actually the risk and reward system. Okay, so when you go to TikTok, you're sitting there flipping through TikTok videos, and think about what's happening there. Okay, you see the video, and it makes you laugh. You get a little hit, right? Okay, and then you flip through some more, but they don't make you laugh. They don't entertain you in whatever way that you happen to be wired to want to be entertained. Okay? And so that's part of the dynamics of what makes it work. It's really not... And so, in other words, if you were going to look at what the problem is with the endorphins in your brain being stimulated, you would think that you would have the same problem just watching an episode of Seinfeld that you have watching TikTok, but you don't. Well, why is that? Well, it's because what you're really bringing to TikTok is the idea that you have a hope for a reward. And then when you get the reward, you're going, that was fun, that was funny, or whatever. And when you don't get the reward, you're a little disappointed or you're bored, and you become addicted to the actual acquisition of the reward. So when that doesn't happen as readily, that's when you start to see the brain changes that are kind of damaging. I bring it up because we experience the same thing learning our animation tools. One of the biggest dangers with animation tools is the fact that it's so easy for a beginner to sit down and just make things move across the screen. Because what they're doing is they're getting the dopamine reward of having accomplished something at almost no cost whatsoever. And what that does is that creates a neural association to train you to think that's normal. And that's very, very dangerous because that's not normal. I used the example the other day of an engineer trying to engineer a product for manufacture where $1 billion is on the line for this product that he's designing. That guy cannot be trying to engineer that product using tools that he doesn't even know, using a lexicon of disciplines or requirements that he doesn't even know, and just hoping against hope that somehow if he pushes the right buttons and twists the right knobs, that a good product's going to come out. It's ridiculous. No one would ever even consider approaching engineering a product that way. There's too much on the line. Well, that's the same thing that the seasoned animator has if he's actually a seasoned animator and he's working for an employer who's paying him to get a job done. He's going to be pragmatic. It's not this big emotional thing of getting the dopamine hit. The danger here with animation is we are all very, very eager to see a result that we can get excited about, and hopefully our friends get excited about, and maybe even ultimately the market will get excited about. Okay? But it's important to understand that there is no such thing as a short or quick path to that. Everything you can do in this arena that is quick will suck. Okay, let me say that again. If it was fast, if you were able to get there fast, it will suck. And what will happen is if you become addicted to creating a lot of stuff that really isn't very good, at least the real market would never accept it as being acceptable work. It wouldn't. Let's be honest. One of the dangers is one time out of 30, let's say, when you approach your tool or your software, you're going to get lucky. And you're going to create something that is cool. And the problem is, just like spinning the wheel in a casino, or just like looking at TikTok videos, the occasional unexpected reward is very effective at training you to expect more of that and to think that's what's normal, but that's not what's normal. That's what I mean by the difference between dividends and rewards. That is really not a reward in my nomenclature. That's a dividend. The reward is what you earn by learning your craft, learning your tools, going through the hard stuff, and creating something that's actually competitive. That's when you can have a reward. And by the way, it's the only time you ever deserve a reward. You don't deserve a reward for opening up, your software of choice and making things move across the screen. So one of the problems we probably have in the animation arena is that it's really easy for us to draw poorly but still make things move. So what happens is we get the dopamine hit of having made things move, but we're making things move that are drawn in such a way. And again, I'm discounting the rare example where somebody with a really crude style, for example, where that actually becomes a thing. But when it does become a thing, it's usually for a really good reason, because there's some entertainment value in it that has nothing to do with their ability to draw. So the entertainment value is there. Otherwise, it would never go viral and it would never become popular and people wouldn't like it. So they're still entertaining people. For me, one of the reasons why I have this eclectic mix, let's say, of tools I use. So, here's Tahoma, here's Blender, here's Krita. Well, why do I have this eclectic mix of tools? Why do I use digital tools for, say, character deformation? In other words, why do I like using squash and stretch, doing this? This is all done digitally. So this is all basically the editing, if you will, of a single drawing. Why do I work that way? Well, actually, it's because I don't really think I'm all that amazingly great at drawing or animating. I think I'm pretty good at it. I'm okay, but I'm not Aaron Blaze or Full Chain Animation or some of these guys that are really good at frame-by-frame animation. That's not me. And I'm not sure I'd want to be. That's okay. It doesn't matter. There's plenty of room in the sandbox for all of us, right? But the reason I mix the tools and use the digital tools so every one of these frames isn't redrawn. And the reason for that is because if I get the drawing correct one time, if I can use the digital tools to get more entertainment value out of that one drawing, then that's what I'm going to do, because I'm not the greatest drawer in the room. Greatest artist, I'm better than average, I know that, but and also there's the sort of, I don't know how to describe this, but there's the salesman, programmer, business person side of me that it's kind of what makes me weird, in that I've got this really strange, well, I shouldn't say strange, I should say I've got an unusual combination of pragmatism on the one hand mixed with a lot of creative artistry kind of stuff on the other, right? So I'm really heavily driven towards music and animation and storytelling and writing and voices, all that stuff. But on the other hand, there's the part of me that says, oh my God, I can pick up the phone and make an hour's worth of phone calls and, probably find somebody who's going to pay me, $500 to do something, or $1,000, like a musical jingle. A musical jingle, the fair market value of a musical jingle is about $1,000, let's say. Like for a radio jingle, sing a song, like the jingle that I play at the beginning of my animation Truman show. If you got no life and there's nowhere to go, then tune in to the animation Truman show. Well, that jingle took me, the whole thing took a half an hour. Certainly the music part, coming up with the idea and then playing the music and blah, blah, blah. So I can create a radio jingle and a fully polished, really good production, which that jingle isn't. But I can create a jingle that's radio ready, generally in about 4 hours. So, if I go play Mr. Salesman for a while, I can find somebody. I will be able to find somebody who's got a really crappy ad on the radio who will at least consider paying me a certain amount of money to create a jingle. So their ads sound better, draw audience better, hold people's attention, help them remember their name, blah, 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 blah. Right? So I'm a guy who has this tug of war going on all the time between my pragmatic business side and my creative artsy-fartsy side. You may not have that problem. I mean, I think everybody's different, and I don't think I've got the market cornered on, what it takes to be the right kind of person. I have a weird combination that, or I should say unusual, that it makes me unique, and we're all unique. So it's all good. I'm not suggesting other people should be like me, stylistically or, otherwise. But I guess the point of that was that I am not working hard to develop the craft of frame-by-frame animation. I am never going to be in the Krita space. I'm never going to be Ed Tadeo. I'm not. I know I'm not. It's not because if I really wanted to be, could I? I'm pretty sure I could. But what he does is not what floats my boat. I love what he does. I think it's awesome. But it's not what I want to do, right? So we all bring a little something different to the table. But the important thing is that if you want to create good work, and I do, then it's really important to approach your work, and this is the advice that is the bottom line advice here. Ask yourself, what would the seasoned animator do? The animator for whom this is boring work. Why doesn't the seasoned animator hurry? He doesn't need the endorphin spike. He doesn't need the dividend. Why? Because he's seen it all before. He's done it all before. There's no question. After you've managed to make things move in a certain way, 100 times, the thrill kind of wears off. For that guy, maybe it's just a job. That's not a bad thing. That's not a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing. So the seasoned animator has a tempered, measured view of the work that he has outgrown all of the emotional drivers that cause us to be too happy with work that's really not good enough on the one hand, that causes us to be too eager to get a finished result, which, by the way, is the greatest guarantor that we will not get a finished result that's up to snuff. Being in a hurry to get the finished result. The extreme of that would be, I want to make things move. So I draw a ball on my screen, and then I use my digital tools to make it move. And that took me exactly 1 minute. If that thrills your soul, which it should the very first time you use the software, okay? Because you're just feeling out what's possible, right? But we have to outgrow that very, very quickly. And again, what's the guide? How do you guide yourself to, what should I learn? What should I do? Look at what you like. Look at what you like. Look at that. Look at your work. Does it compare? Does it sit in the mix? You could cut your work in with the show you like, and you wouldn't even realize that your shot got inserted into the show. Now, that's a high standard, I admit. That's tough. You may try that a few times and not reach it. That's okay. That's okay, because you're going through the process, and your vocabulary, your creative vocabulary is expanding. Your knowledge of your tools is expanding. You're learning the techniques so that when you face a challenge, you can kind of go, well, I might bump into a couple things that I won't know how to do, but the odds are I think I'm going to get it. I think I'm going to get this one, right? Pretty sure I'm going to succeed. That's the mindset you want to have. The interesting thing about that vis-a-vis this shot, to sort of dovetail to what it took to create this shot, is that once I actually sat down and I took that approach to it, I said, what would the seasoned animator do? How would he look at it? Going, well, okay, let's start looking at that. To finish my sentence, once I looked at this shot that way, to go from this to this actually took about an hour or so. It really didn't take that. It was kind of crazy how long it didn't take. because I just approach it pragmatically, and I didn't allow myself to be disappointed. And by the way, let me mention one more thing about that dopamine disappointment thing as it relates to like TikTok videos and things like that. Part of the danger, and the reason it is a sort of a psychiatric danger for people to become too addicted to that risk, to that reward mechanism, is that when you flip the video on TikTok, think about what actually happens psycho-emotionally. When you are not entertained by the little behavior that you have been conditioned to learn does entertain you every so often, but sort of unpredictably, emotionally, you're actually kind of mad at TikTok. You know, you're disappointed. It let you down. Okay? Think about that. Now you're getting maybe a little frustrated. Well, the difference between TikTok and regular real human relationships is that in a real relationship, you can let someone know what your expectation is. This is why people are passive aggressive. When we're passive aggressive, it's because we have an explosion one day where all of our disappointment comes out. And the problem is, if you never communicated with your partner or your significant other or your friend what your expectations are, in other words, if you were afraid to tell the truth about what you expected out of the relationship, and you probably were because you're afraid if you told the truth, you'll lose the relationship. And that's possible. But if you never clearly expressed your expectations, then what right do you have to be down on them when you're disappointed by them? Of course they're going to disappoint you. Okay? So you have to have this step first of expressing your expectations clearly and courageously before you have a right to be disappointed by the person. Now, if the person goes ahead and disappoints you after they know full well what your expectations are, then the truth becomes scary. Why? Because the truth is they don't care enough about the expectations that are important to me to honor those expectations, which means, and that's okay, they have a right to not honor your expectations. So they're their own person. They get to do what they want to do. And that's really hard because that's the moment where you say to yourself, well, the truth is maybe this isn't the right relationship. Maybe my life's going to change because once we get all the truths out on the table, it turns out that, you know, you could call it that the person doesn't love me, but the reality is it just their values are different. What's important to them is not important to you. Now compare that to what happens in the TikTok situation. Think about it. You have no way to express to an app what your expectation is. So you're putting a lot of emotional risk and reward into a scenario over which you have absolutely no control or no ability to act as a mature person. You can't have a mature relationship unless you're able and courageous enough to express your expectations first, so that then you can find out the truth whether those expectations are going to be disappointed or not. But how can you be disappointed in somebody who never knew what your expectations are? When we interact with apps and we interact with Facebook, we don't have any control over expressing our expectations. So then what we do is we get addicted to the risk and reward dopamine hit dynamic, and the easiest way to build on that is to simply evolve towards a small group that shares your values and for whom you'll get the little dopamine rewards that are consistent with what tends to happen with that group. And so sociopolitically, we tend to get divided into smaller and smaller groups that are adamantly opposed to each other. You know, and now we're getting into basically politics and religion, which is a whole nother thing. I'm not going to keep going in that direction. But the takeaway is that all of this stuff is in your head. It's all in your head. It's all in your mind. It's not reality. So when you engage socially and tell yourself not that the engagement isn't real, but what you are experiencing in your own heart and mind is not real. It's unique to you. You see? You've created it. And these are dynamics and attractors, drivers, if you will, that we all wrestle with 100% of the time. So the difference is between becoming a mature person or an immature person is the mature person takes responsibility. Well, as an animator, you cannot take responsibility if you bring expectations to the tool. So I come to Blender. You guys saw some of the struggle with this the last few sessions, but I come to Blender with the expectation that as I engage with the tools, number one, it's not going to be buggy, and I'm going to be able to get this result that makes me go, oh, this is so cool. Well, the problem is that may be an unrealistic expectation. Depends on the tool. And it certainly depends one hell of a lot on my knowledge of the tool. In the case of Krita, again, it's a similar situation as far as this particular software tool goes, where I don't have the ability. I mean, I haven't really tried like engaging with the developers to let them know what's important to me. I'm not saying that's a good idea or a bad idea or that it would go well or not. It doesn't matter. On Discord, we see the discussion sometimes about how, Darren T might mention something to Rodney Baker, who mentioned something to Mahjong or whatever his name is, who does development on Tahoma, and then word kind of gets over to the OpenTunes guys, and now we're a little disappointed because the OpenTunes guys say, well, we really don't want to implement that feature in OpenTunes. Okay. Well, the responsible or mature adult says, you know what? That's their prerogative. So if I'm disappointed, okay, I can be disappointed if I want, but it doesn't do any good to rave against the software. Now, again, I've been guilty of this a million times. In the case of Krita, I'm working with Krita 5, and it's a mixed bag. All I can say is it's a mixed bag. There's features that are really cool that they finally got right, and in the process, there's some things, especially about the navigation in the animation timeline, that they really got wrong. Or actually they rolled back and reversed things that were working well and no longer do, right? So it's definitely a mixed bag. So anyway, I think that's probably enough discussion about the whole advice thing. I hope you guys find it useful because, my desire for you guys at whatever level of accomplishment or intention you are, my hope for you is that you come to your tools and you come to the process as an adult, as a responsible person, as a pragmatic person who says, okay, this is going to be difficult, and that's okay. And there's no reward here. There's not supposed to be. I'm not looking for a reward. I'm looking for a result. Okay? That's the difference. Don't come to your tool and your process looking for a reward. If you do something and it turns out well and you feel good about it, that's okay. Okay, I'm not saying it's not good to feel okay or to feel good. It's not okay to feel good. I'm not saying that it's not. But what I'm saying is when we are beginners, both in terms of our craft and beginners in terms of our knowledge and control and mastery of our tools, we are highly, highly, highly susceptible. Just like the guy that's doing social media and TikTok. We are highly highly susceptible to becoming addicted to dividends that make us feel good about work that's not even close to good enough, and the net result is we don't improve. I can approach Krita or Tahoma and do relatively crappy work that will get me attaboys on social media. And yet that same work would never be even close to acceptable on the latest direct-to-Netflix cartoon. That's the point I'm making. Do you want to be the guy that's creating the next direct-to-Netflix cartoon? Or do you want to be satisfied with a few attaboys on Discord? For me, I'm happy to engage with Discord. But I want my mindset to be that I share my work so people can maybe be inspired. And the rush of enjoyment that Maria just cited is perfectly, yes. But when you get the rush of enjoyment, when you have solved the problem fully, that's not a dividend. That's a reward. Now you get to define, because you are a responsible person. You are a person who takes responsibility. You get to decide what the reward, what the qualifications are to be rewarded. All I'm saying is we have a strong proclivity to stop halfway. We stop and we quit and we go start something new every time the process goes sideways, and effectively you could say we failed. We ran into a problem where either our knowledge, or it could be sometimes it's a shortcoming of the tool, but usually it's not. Usually it's a shortcoming in our knowledge or our craft. And now we have the psycho-emotional anti-dividend. It's a real negative experience, like, either I suck or this tool sucks or this is too hard. And it's at that moment is when you actually grow and improve, if you get through it. And because of the TikTok mentality, on TikTok it's easy to just flip the screen one more time, right? So that's what we do. We flip the screen. Metaphorically speaking, you flip the screen, you hope you're going to get a dopamine hit from a laugh or, something makes you laugh or whatever. If you don't get that, what do? You flip the screen again. Well, of course you do. It's because that's the only option there, because you're not engaging as an adult with something that's difficult where there is a potential reward other than the dividend, other than the dopamine hit. So now you think about it. That's the problem with TikTok. The problem with TikTok is you get the least useful reward with no control over any of the inputs and no control over any of the outputs. And so all you're doing is conditioning yourself to be addicted to nothing. That's what you're doing. I mean, I say it almost, obviously I sound critical of it, but I'm only critical of it is because we've got an entire culture of people who that is their habit. That is the very strong neural pathways that have been programmed into their brain and have to be reversed in order for them to learn how to function in the real world as a responsible adult and productive member of society. That's a pretty strong statement, I know. I mean, look, you could say I'm exaggerating it. I'm sort of turning up the contrast. But I don't think I'm wrong. And I wouldn't say this or express it if it wasn't a fact that I've been guilty of the same thing. I have not developed as an animator or as a storyteller as quickly as I should have, and God knows I haven't developed as a composer in the music space nearly as quickly as I should have. And I believe that the reason largely boils down to the stuff I'm describing here today, where, and I have to say this, a true confession in my case, I've been lucky that I had enough talent, just natural ability, that, say, for example, in the music space, I could engage with a client, and this is true all over the radio, by the way. If you look at the space where people are creating musical jingles for radio, okay, this is all over the place. Most jingles are pretty bad. They're either badly written, or they're badly performed, or the arrangement is real amateurish. Well, why is that? Well, it's because somebody with a modicum of talent can do, let's say on a scale to 10, let's say John Williams is a 10, okay? Okay. You can do musical work that's at a level of about a 1 or a 2, and that actually is good enough to impress the guy that's just trying to run a carpet cleaning business, okay? So you've got to climb it. Think about this, and I guarantee you this is true because I've lived it. So if your talent allows you to basically be a really undisciplined person but create work that's at a 1 or a 2 or maybe even sometimes a 3 level, that is actually good enough to go make a living making radio jingles. So that's not a bad thing. It's important to acknowledge that's not a bad thing. If the carpet cleaner's happy with the jingle and I'm happy with the money, then we do not have a problem here. And that's okay. It's important to acknowledge that in the marketplace, it's just like when I talked about the difference in animated shows that you might like, the difference between South Park and One Punch Man or a Disney movie. It is okay. The marketplace embraces all levels of this stuff. That is not a bad thing. But I'm talking about the heart and the emotion and the experience of the kind of people who come here. What do you want to be? What do you want to do? I don't think that that's what you want, is to do work that's a 1 or a 2 level. Maybe you do, and that's okay, because again, the person who, and the thing is, it's difficult, because we have to break this up into categories. You might draw at a 2 level, but you might be able to cobble something together that entertains at a 10 level, okay? So, well, maybe not a 10, but let's say a 7 or 8. What would an example of that be? It would be an explainer video. If you look at explainer videos, Explainer videos typically use very geometric, very bad drawing. Basically, a lot of the drawing is generated by the computer, like literally, like there's no drawing involved. But you know what? If you take characters that are created out of little squares and rectangles, and you're able to turn that into something that educates me about some, social issue or the benefits a business provides or whatever it is, if you can entertain me and engage with me or sell me on something at a level of 7, but the drawings that are inside of it are at a level of 2, that's okay. That doesn't matter. That's not a bad thing. Because you've successfully entertained or engaged. You've accomplished the actual goal, right? So I really want to emphasize there's a wide range of levels of performance where you take each of the different categories in that same explainer video. You might have a music track that's just something that, a guy like me could throw off in 5 minutes, like literally 5 minutes. In fact, I've done it. I have done it. So, here on YouTube, on my channel, there are 2 different explainer videos that I produced where the whole project might have taken a week, okay? But the music in those projects literally was done in both cases in like 5-10 minutes. I can just whip it off. Boom. Yeah, it sounds good. It feels good. You just throw it in there. The music doesn't have to be John Williams. In fact, it would probably be counterproductive if it was, because it's just background music, So you got to choose the right tool for the job, the right level of performance for the task at hand. And that's why bringing it back home here, that's why I say I'm not the best guy in the club at drawing. I'm not. And I'm certainly not the best guy in the world at animation. I have a pretty good instinct. If the tools facilitate the process suitably, I have a pretty good instinct for taking a drawing and bringing it to life in a way that's fairly entertaining. I do believe that is where my strength lies. So this, for me, very entertaining shot. And I get off on the fact that the whole thing was done essentially with one drawing. I think that's cool. It's not everybody's cup of tea, So for me, what I did in this case was I got this far with Blender. So now we're getting back at the work at hand. I got this far with Blender, and absolutely, because of the complexity of this shot, definitely realized that I made so many mistakes. Both in reacquainting myself with Blender, but also in how I planned the work. Once I figured out what I was trying to do, I made so many mistakes. It was insane. I don't think anybody will ever watch all 5 videos because it would be too painful. I wouldn't blame you. I wouldn't want to watch it. I look like an idiot through a lot of it, but I had to do it. I wanted to do it. Because I know that this tool has a lot of really wonderful surprises that if I combined the tool with my particular talent and ability, there's some cool stuff I'm going to be able to do. So it was worth it. It was totally worth it. I'm glad I did it. And now when I come back and look at my show, this shot really cuts into the show better than what was there before. I promise you. It really does. So how did we get from the Blender thing to this? Well, I'll just give you the summary. First of all, let's turn the shadows off because we got to get back to what I came out of Blender with. Okay, so this layer here. Let me see here. Okay. There's a lot to consider here. Let's start with the bowls, okay? Completely forgetting about, let's not start with the bowls. Let's start with covering the bowls. Okay, because the problem was that when I put the bowls in, they're covering up Mel, So what do? Well, all I did was I just created a duplicate of Mel, and then I put it in a group and added an erase layer, and then frame by frame I went through. I was able to erase most of Mel on the first frame, but then I had to go through with the brush and in the erase layer and basically erase stuff so that I wound up with just an arm that was covering up the bowls appropriately. That's what I wound up with. So I don't really need to recap how that was done. Suffice to say I used an erase layer, so that was job 1. The first thing I did was I had to get that done. I knew that I was going to be able to do the hands, okay? So the right hand, what I did was I created the hand, and then I used the Krita transform mask to basically add animation keys, because I knew the hand was going to be the same hand through the whole thing. Okay? And then just to improve performance in Krita, I made a duplicate of it and then baked it down. So now it's just an animated sequence of frames. And probably if I hit play, it doesn't even have to refill the cache. You can, I mean, it's quick anyway. You can have a lot of layers of stuff animated in Krita. And if it's all just keyframes of picture, Krita performs pretty well. The transform mask does hog performance, and so baking it down is usually pretty good practice. So in this case, I can take the, I'm happy with it. So the hand layer that has the transform mask, might as well delete it. There's no reason keeping it around. And I can even take the right hand and hit Control E and bake it down so that it's actually now baked into the entire animation of the arm. Okay, so now they're married together. So same thing with the left hand. I mean, I did the same thing. I used a transform mask and just went through frame by frame and moved it around. So we'll get rid of that version, and then I baked it down, and so this is what you get. You get just this little shape that when you hit the play button, it just moves around the screen. See? But when you put it in with everything else, there is a problem, by the way. Okay, there's a problem that has something to do with baking it down. So I'll fix that right now. I'll show you guys how you fix that. Okay, so what got baked into the animation is one frame right here. So we're on frame 9. And this is the left hand, not the right hand. So I want to be in the left hand layer. Okay, right here you can see there's some interpolated animation going on right there. See it crawling? See it crawl? Okay, that's easy to fix. All we'll do is we'll just go to this frame, and now I'm going to hit Shift and start toggling back to where it started crawling, right there, and just hit Control Shift X and delete those keys. So now this drawing, it's kind of like Tahoma's implicit hold. Now that drawing will just prevail until the point where he moved. So not a problem. And arguably, yeah, I mean, that looks fine. That looks fine. There's a little bit of a jump there, but... Okay. So now, can the left hand be baked down into his body? So in other words, should this piece be baked into his body? My sense is if I did it, I'd probably regret it. There'd be some stupid reason later where I wish I had them separate again. So I'm going to leave that separate. So let's talk about the bowls. So I get the bowls in there. Let's put the hand back over top of it. So now the question was, well, how would you do a shadow? How would you do a cast shadow? Look at that. I mean, that's super cool. It was actually stupidly easy. Okay. Given that the group of bowls was also animated with a transform mask. Okay, so I used a transform mask to basically jump the bowls around the screen. So the bowls are just a 2-frame animation of the 2 positions of the bowl. Bop, bop, bop. Well, like, boop, 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 boop. So the bowls just do that, right? So that's baked in. And so what I did was I added a transform mask to move the collection of bowls around the screen to match Mel. And then I baked that down. So I baked that into the bowls. So now the bowls are animating automatically. And I don't need the transform mask anymore, hampering performance. So now you got this. You got this group of bowls that dances around the screen. So now if you want to create a cast shadow, all you got to do is make a duplicate of that layer and then add a curves, do curves, and then just, well, I can show you. If I go Control M and add curves, I can just turn it down to black like that. And with Krita, if all these keyframes are selected, I can hit multi-frame and it'll apply the curves to every single frame. And then I just did the same thing with a blur. Okay? Simple. Then I just added I didn't even add a transform mask, actually. Well, I guess I did, but I didn't animate it. I didn't have to. I just added a transform mask that took the shadowed bowls and just tilted them, basically rotated them a little bit. And then I turned on the alpha inherit. See that? So that the shadow's only seen where it overlaps the layers that are below it. Instant cast shadow. So that the whole cast shadow, which is one of the coolest things in the shot, took like 2 minutes to do. I mean, it was really, really easy. Now, there is a problem with that. When I go back to the show, it is my opinion that the cast shadow of the bulls, you see it's not here? My opinion is that it's one thing too many. It's materially changing the aesthetic of the show. It's a cool detail. It looks great, but it snaps me out of the show a little bit. And plus, it introduces a situation where now we got all these other shots downstream where are we going to put the cast shadow on those too? You know, by the way, completely setting aside that there's a little bit of an off-character issue where his look changed a bit. Okay. So for me, with doing the cast shadows and painting in the hands over top and, you know, being able to do a trick like this, which allows you to make the bowls be both in front of and behind Mel. For me, taking what I did in Blender and jumping back to Krita was simply the right choice. And I'm glad I did, because it only took about, like I said, I don't know, getting from this animation of Mel to the final shot probably took, well, let's see. I mean, I worked on it this morning for like 45 minutes, and then maybe a half hour last night. Yeah, I mean, somewhere between an hour and a half. So, you know, what are you going to do? It's works for me. And then, by the way, I also went in with the freehand path tool and just added cast shadows, or I'm sorry, you know, the animated shadows on Mel's body. That's kind of important. And then I also added this one. This is just a single shape. There it is. That I just blurred a little bit, so that when he turns to Luka, he sort of steps into the shadow, you might say, right? And frankly, this layer has no animation keys. So if I change this positioning with the transform tool right now, it will not it will not add another keyframe. It's only going to add a keyframe if I've already put one in the layer. As long as this layer is not treated as an animated layer, I'd go ahead and make a little adjustment here like that, because I'm kind of feeling like maybe it should be. Yes, I like that better. But yeah, so he sort of steps into the shadow and out of it and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so for me, as cool as those cast shadows look from the bowl, I think they should be left out of the shot, honestly. And that's it. Okay, so we'll save our work and we'll render it into the show, and that shot is done. And then we're going to get on to actually the shot with Luka, the wide shot. I've decided I want to redo that. So sorry about that bing. That was because I accidentally clicked on Vegas while the shot was still rendering. So hopefully that didn't cause a problem. And it did, but I can fix that problem by just reloading the show. So you guys can't see this, but I am reloading the show. And now if we jump over there, so now we have, when we first see Mel emerge, we've got, that's the new shot, which I think sits in the mix really nicely. And then this shot right here of Luka I want to redo. It's not bad, but it's not quite where I want it to be. So there we go. And frankly, I wanted to maybe apply a little bit more of that hand-drawn animation thing. So here's Luka. So when it comes to digital tools nowadays, the dance I find myself doing is, that makes it challenging, is that I like to, when I'm doing a pencil test, I like to use digital tools to mush things around and just figure out my motion, right? I don't want to redraw it if I don't have to. That's just my particular approach. It's not the right approach for a lot of people. If you're really into hand-drawn frame-by-frame animation, then you probably don't like that idea, and that's okay. We're all different. But for me, if I draw this and I can pound out a good rendering of Luka that I'm satisfied with, then I want to kind of see what else I can do with it animation-wise. Okay? So this part of the process, it wouldn't matter which tool I'm using. It really wouldn't. Yeah, I know the characterization looks different. That's why it's the later shots, though, that need to be modified. Okay, so Amar's pointing out that this Mel looks a little different than this Mel. This is the one that's the problem. This shot's been done, like, I've redone this shot a bunch of times. But yeah, this shot needs serious modification. I actually improved it a bit by replacing the eyes with the eyes from this shot, but it's just not where it needs to be, and it's a problem for another time. Not a big deal. I'll get it. So for me, one of the things I worked on a few weeks ago was trying to find ways in both Krita and Tahoma to be able to very quickly toggle between what I would call pencil test drawing versus ink. Because the idea is, well, because the most expensive time-consuming thing is ink and paint. So is there a way to keep this really loose, fun, kind of mode that I'm in when I'm doing a pencil test, and almost kind of trick the system into letting me go ahead and get the ink done at the same time. And the best in Krita, there's two ways to do it, really. And I'm gonna go ahead and erase this line and redraw it. I'm pressing a little too hard, actually. So one way to do it in Krita is to actually use your background and your foreground color in conjunction. So what are you talking about? Well, if I hit the X key, Krita toggles between the foreground and the background color. So if I sketch like this and then hit the X key, I can go ahead and put the final line in there. So for me, this is a technique that, like, if I wasn't going to be using digital tools for deformation and stuff, I would really want to, like, capitalize on this type of a technique, because it seems to me that it's the best way to work if you're wanting to do everything with frame-by-frame animation, because you want to keep that looseness of, that you get with a pencil test. So here's a great example where I drew his eyebrow kind of in the wrong place, and one of the downers, by the way, in Krita 5 is that well, first of all, they hijacked the venerable using the M key to flip the screen horizontally. For some reason, they jettisoned that, and in the process, actually broke the hotkey completely, and it definitely doesn't perform as well anymore. So I don't know what changed, but something changed. Unfortunately. So doing it this way, if I'm using the X key to toggle between the foreground and the background color, let me hit the Z key. I don't think I want to keep that. Then that's just a matter of hitting the X key. There's another way to do it, which would be to actually just use 2 different layers. If you do it with colors, then you have to have a way to get rid of the red, which I've demonstrated here a couple times. So for me, I use color to alpha to turn all the red essentially invisible, and then I use my curves tool on the alpha channel to clamp that the contrast of the alpha channel, so it's fully so that all the red is completely gone, basically. Get rid of it completely. Because if you don't get rid of it completely, so like you can't see it, but yet it's still there with a opacity of like 2. The problem with that is when you go to do a fill operation, it'll still detect all these scribble lines, and you won't be able to get a clean fill. So there's a bit of a dance there. But this point of the story, I suppose, is this is one way that I do like working. And by the way, this is not quite working. Meaning having the pencil test and the ink happening in tandem. I like that. I've never seen anybody else do it that way, so I don't know if that's really a thing. But for me, I do like it. So, the danger that you always run into with I think with this type of work is that you can be doing a scribbly pencil test, and there are things that are suggested to the imagination that aren't actually there in the drawing. So you do run a risk when you jump straight to ink of, and I've done it a million times, so that's why I mention it, is when you jump straight to ink, you then realize there's stuff in the drawing that's not there, right? That you never drew, and which I'm experiencing that right now with his foot. And one thing I have realized in the last couple months or whatever is you really need to take the time to make sure all the elements are there, because if you don't, you're going to, at least I will, wind up, you'll draw it very poorly, is what'll happen, because you're going straight from just the idea of what's there to trying to ink it. So you're trying to ink something that there's no guide, right? There's really no guidelines. And you can do it. I mean, if you're a good artist, you can probably pull it off. And I've pulled it off from time to time. But basically, what I found is it's better to just keep scribbling, man. Make sure everything you're going to need is there as a guide. If you don't have the guide, increasingly, I don't think it's appropriate to jump straight to ink unless that pencil test is really tight. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. Okay, so this is probably going to have some wrinkles. So this is a good example of what I'm talking about in terms of a workflow. That's probably no good. Actually, right here's an example of what I was talking about. This hat is not right. And this is where the pencil test part is cool, because you can draw through the character, you can keep it loose, and you can find it. You can find your drawing. That's way better. And now I just hit the X key and smack that in there. Smack the ink in. Okay, so that's a pretty good drawing of Luka, much better than what I had before. And now what do we do to clean it up? Well, you're going to go filter, colors, color to alpha, and what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of red. Okay, so now if you look close, you can see it's still there. So we'll kind of rotate around, and because our red wasn't a pure red. So if we put it maybe about there, something like that, you can see that it is affecting our black lines, but that's okay. You can, adjust the threshold. Usually the defaults work pretty well, but let's go with that. And then I'm going to hit Control M, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a curves operation on the alpha channel. And you can see these spikes in the histogram that give you a clue about what those edits are going to need to be. So here you're tightening it up and getting rid of the remnants of the red is what you're doing here. Here, what you're doing is you're tightening up the black by increasing the contrast in the alpha channel. Okay, if you go too far, you will lose your anti-aliasing. Okay, so now I'm gonna, whoops, I didn't mean to hit tab, I meant to hit tilde. Okay, so now if we isolate Luka, the question is he going to fill well? And I'm just gonna do a test. I'm gonna erase this afterwards, but here's Luka, we're in behind mode. Okay, that filled pretty well. Let's go to the blue color and see if we do as well with the body or the clothing. We got a leak, unfortunately. Okay, but that's okay. We're in behind mode, so that means we can scribble like that. And let's hit the F. Okay, so there we go. And see what happened? I mean, I can remember in Krita where this was impossible. To get a nice, clean fill like that on art where you had a bunch of scribbling that in that same layer that you quote-unquote erased. Boy, it used to be difficult to get that result. But, yeah, it's improved. I'll go ahead and smack the color on there. And let me look at, I guess technically, Luka has kind of brownish eyebrows. So I'm going to hit the G key. Since I'm in behind mode, I can just put a lasso around it and it's going to fill in the eyebrows. If I hit the N key to go to regular size, that's what actually appears on TV. So the highly critical worry word out there is going, oh man, that looks kind of rough. You know, those fills, it's a little iffy, isn't it? Well, no. At actual TV size, this is the actual size of the art. So we're in good shape. We are in good shape. All right. So now this is where we're getting into the workflow of kind of the digital tools thing. If I was in, actually it doesn't matter if you're using the Blender Grease Pencil or Krita. It doesn't matter what you're using. You're always going to have the same problem. So the basic problem is this. Luka needs to look up at Mel, okay? So let me go to the Luka layer here. I'm looking. There it is. Okay. So the Luka layer, by the way, needs a animation key. So Control Insert. And how are we doing on time? 3:19. I'm going to have to quit like in 10 minutes probably. By the way. Okay. So now we got a keyframe, and now I'm going to just kind of sketch a little bit and show what I'm talking about here. So hit the B key. In behind mode is okay. But he's going to look up like this at Mel. Okay, so basically Mel animated into the scene, his body kind of in silhouette just moved in here. And so Luka's going to be looking up at Mel. Well, when he looks up, Luka's also going to, probably his body's going to kind of sit up a little bit like that, right? So let's go to normal mode. So this part of his body, this contour here, is probably going to move maybe this much. And his head is probably going to move like this. Well, the problem is we can't just deform it because we also have to draw, we have to go from this to, you know, this to this. You know, hey Mel, how you doing kind of thing, right? So we got to draw the turnaround. And so now this is where you've got a choice you have to make. Your choice is, do you animate the turnaround without having the pleasure of seeing the body move because like the same thing in the Blender Grease Pencil to a degree is that any deformation you use, like with the liquefy tool, like hit the A key and go to liquefy. Okay, so if I sort of try to get his body like where I need it to be, like that, Well, the drawing of the face is baked into that deformation. So I created an animation keyframe, but so what are you going to do first? It's a constant question of what you're going to do first. So it's the order in which you do things. Probably what I would be inclined to do is I'm going to rotate the face first and then animate the body. So as for me, others may disagree, but for me the general rule has proven to be that you want to work from small to large. So the movement of his body in terms of just kind of sitting back or sitting up a bit, that's what I call secondary animation. That's the final thing you do, the last thing you're going to do, just to punch it up. And you could make it, you could do it with drawings. That wouldn't be a crime. So you might have 3 keys here, so you got a little move to there and then to there, that type of thing. Or you could do it with deformation. I tend to favor doing it with deformation, especially if the deformation tools allow me to do it smoothly, so that, let's just say, this key is interpolated, right? So I've got this drawing, and then maybe I morph it to this position, but the software figures out what to do in between, right? For me, usually that's the better choice, but it's not definitively the best choice. A lot of people would not do that. They would draw 3 drawings, So, so for me, I'm going to say what I really want to do is draw Luka's face rotating all in a single, just without his body moving at all. And then once we have that, go ahead and do the deformation. Now the problem you're going to have in Krita, as opposed to Blender, is with Blender, you could take that entire sequence with all of the, let's see, I might have just changed the wrong color. This is one of the reasons why I dance between software. In Blender, you could have this sequence of 3 drawings, let's say, where his body doesn't move but his head turns. And you could take that sequence and put a lattice over top of it and do all the body animation fine. And the animated frame-by-frame animation would in effect happen underneath the lattice. So that would be an effective solution. In Tahoma, you could add the plastic tool, a very simple plastic tool rig that's just a single bone cutting through them like that. And maybe for the shoulders, a couple bones going out to the shoulders. The problem is, in Tahoma, is if you do it that way and then you decide that you need to change something in the individual drawings, you cannot draw into Luka, like change his facial expression, once the plastic tool is applied. So that's a bit of a disadvantage with Tahoma versus Blender. In Krita, it's almost the worst of both possible worlds, because the only way you can really do it in Krita is to apply the liquefy tool twice. So move his body a little bit and then move it a little bit more. And then make sure you're moving the head as well, so you sort of have to just squish everything around until it sort of works. That would be tantamount to, in the Blender grease pencil, not using a lattice, but just doing 2 frames where you make a pixel selection and then just drag things around. The Blender grease pencil, moving the vertices of the grease pencil or using the sculpting tool, is probably the best of all the available solutions for this reason. If I've redrawn his face 3 times, well, and of course, the first drawing of Luka wasn't done in the Blender grease pencil, so, okay. But the thing is, with Blender, if you went ahead and drew this, the body, and then you drew the 3 faces, so you have 3 keyframes, and the only thing that changes is the face, you could then use the sculpting tool to grab him from the shoulders up and do all the body animation. And actually, you could, well, you'd have to create 2 keyframes the same way you'd have to with Liquify and Krita. But in Blender, if you said, okay, I want to think ahead, this gets back to the workflow, the sort of pragmatic thing I talked about earlier. The workflow in Blender would say, okay, I got this first drawing of Luka. Well, now what I want to do is actually take his head, split it off into a different layer, and make these 3 drawings. Why? So that then I can animate the grease pencil strokes to this final position when he perks up a little bit, and then I can create an interpolated keyframe in between the 2. And the problem with that is I still have to manually animate the position of his head. So these are the things that, I just go through that, and hopefully you guys can follow it, but I only go through that to say that every single shot I do, all of these questions are going through my mind. I'm always thinking about these strategies. And some people would say, well, geez, that's stupid. Just draw 3 drawings. You're going through a lot of gyrations in order to avoid inking and painting one drawing. And that is completely true. And in many cases, that's exactly what I've done. If you look at the King Vespigi animation I did about a week and a half ago, that's what I did. It was all frame-by-frame animation. No plastic tool. I did it in Tahoma, but there was no plastic tool involved. It was just old school frame-by-frame animation. So, I need to take the focus away from Krita because it was in that locked state. Okay, so for me, I'm going to say Control-Shift-X. I think this is an example where the best solution is probably the best solution is just to draw it 3 times. Although one could make the argument in Krita to do this. Take the S key and say, okay, fine, let's take this and go Control-X, Control-V, and just put his head on a different layer. Why? So that I can take his head and I'll have one liquefy frame, but then I could actually, just to see how this works, let's use a regular free transform and flip his head and then rotate it up and see when he turns up to Mel, that pose is actually exactly right. That's exactly the right pose. But obviously his eyes will be open and he'll be smiling. But as far as, for me, it's always like philosophically, if I've drawn Luka's head perfectly, I don't want to have to draw it again and have it be a little off or something, right? So we're still going to have to draw this one, although you could tween it this way. You could say, well, let's go like that. Oops, the selection is not stellar. Let's go like that so we grab the whole layer. Okay, so let's just see how that feels. Yeah, see, look at that. That's an effective tween. Just a little bit of a move and then a snap to the final position. Now all I have to do is redraw his eyes and mouth, really, and then just patch it up. But patching this crap up here is going to take no time at all. That right there, whoop-de-doo. So for me, again, somebody else might have a different way of doing it, but for me, if I can get my characterization on and just use digital tools to save myself some, not so much save time, although it does save time, it's really for me more about saving myself from the problem of my own lack of skill. And the lack of skill will cause the characterization of the character to morph over time. And if I can avoid that, I want to avoid that. Okay, so that's it really for today. And I'm gonna look through. Obviously, Amar's got a bunch of comments here. See if there's anything that we want to discuss. You mentioned the characterization problem on Mel, which of course you're completely correct. But you're talking about when he's in darkness. Okay. Since I'm sure you're still here, let me come back to that in just a second. Oh, don't bother to screenshot it, Amar. I know what you're talking about. There's some Mel issues. This stuff right here was all done a long time ago, and honestly, that characterization probably could be fixed, but that is a single drawing being animated. That's going to be easy to fix. I could literally steal the head probably from somewhere in this sequence here. So that's easy. This doesn't matter because it's a wide shot. This doesn't matter because it's a quick shot. So, yeah, I know what you're talking about. You're correct. There's a definite issue right there. But that's going to be a no-brainer to fix. The greater issue by far is we've got this characterization here, which for me, I'm pretty happy with. That sort of screams Mel to me. And when I get to here, it doesn't. Something is a little off there in his characterization. You can also do interpolation without the lattice in Blender as long as the points remain the same. Correct. Well, that's what I was saying here with Luka, is if you were going to do it, probably the middle ground for this particular shot was if this was done in the Blender grease pencil, is you go ahead and cut the head out and draw the two poses of the head, and then you'd use the grease pencil tools to just move the points around on his body, and then you could interpolate the tween, but you couldn't do that with the face, because if it's redrawn, obviously it would not interpolate. So, I mean, the truth of the matter is it's only one little tween, so you probably would just drag the points around. You don't need a lattice. You would just use deformation. So you would either use the edit tool with the proportional editing tool, edit mode I should say, or you would use sculpting. Either way. I mean, if you look at what Daniel Lara does, you know, Daniel Lara is the guy that did the animation on the Hero open movie that was done with the Blender grease pencil, and I've mentioned him a few times here in the live stream where I always forget his name, but his name's Daniel Lara, and his I don't know if he has a YouTube channel, but he's known as Peppyland, P-E-P-E-L-A-N-D, Peppyland. Daniel Lara, I mean, he's basically the creative guy who has informed the grease pencil development, I would say. Daniel Lara is the key guy that's been there all along the way the last 5 years as the grease pencil has developed. And he tends to favor, if you look at his work, like speed paints or whatever, he totally tends to favor sculpting. A lot of sculpting, really good use of onion skin. He's a hell of an animator. Daniel Lara is a really, really good animator. Excellent. The da-dum guy. I don't know what that means. The Hero open movie. Oh, see, I don't even know about that. So, yeah, and I mean, my whole point is that any of these animation problems there are items that have to be addressed in a certain order, and it's a little different for every shot, and you just build up your sort of lexicon of techniques, you know. Sometimes it's better to do the small stuff first and then use secondary animation. Like, in other words, in this case, if most of the, let's say, if there was more body language involved and the only thing that had to be redrawn was his head because it flips, then in Tahoma or Blender, the best solution would probably be to just draw the head and then do the secondary animation with either a lattice or the plastic tool. And that would probably work fine, because then you could bend his body back a little bit and raise his shoulders a little bit so he just sits up. The risk you run with the plastic tool is it's really hard to animate. Like, if you want to make his shoulders come up a little bit, like let me just show here. So in other words, if you wanted to use the plastic tool to do this, just raise his shoulders up and kind of move his body back like that, it's going to be brutally difficult to do that with the plastic tool without at the same time having his face inadvertently do this or something, like stretch a little bit in a way that you didn't intend. You can do it, but it's a pain in the butt. So given a choice, in this case, if I'm doing it in Krita, which I am, I'm going to use the plastic tool. I'm just going to be careful. Not the plastic tool. I'm sorry, the liquify tool, and just be careful. And having his head on a separate layer helps enormously with that. See what I mean? That's what I just demonstrated there. You tend to get all the time with the plastic tool if you're not really, really careful. Into home, it's really the great weakness of the plastic tool, is that you can't really control the bones influence very well. So for me, grease pencil with a lattice wouldn't be too bad of a way to do this one. The basic problem. So what's the problem with why not do it in the grease pencil then? Basically, here's the weakness with the grease pencil, for me, in terms of the workflow that I am still evolving into, is that I like the fact that in Krita I can just draw a lasso around it and just cut a piece out, hit Control V. Now it's in a separate layer. And yes, you're going to have a little bit of cleaning up to do on these tweens, but it takes 5 minutes and you can do it. With Blender, because of the way the grease pencil splits up, you cannot just cut this in half in the Blender grease pencil. Once in a while, like his face, if you wanted to, you can't, because all the fills have to resolve in some way, and you wind up with a lot of artifacting that's kind of weird. Maybe I could demonstrate it this way. If you say, I'm sorry, edit mode, I want to select lasso. Okay, so if I select half of his head and then I just cut it, well, first of all, I can't cut it. What I have to do is move it to another layer. But let me come up with a little better example here. Let me cut it in a bit stranger way. Okay, so if I tried to cut these strokes off, and I can demonstrate it by duplicating them. Okay, you can see what happens. That what you see right there is what happens all the time. Now that's not really a criticism, because this is a vector-based format that's doing fills the way vector-based formats tend to do fills. So that's not a criticism per se, but it is a thing. You know, this is reality. That's what you get when you try to work in the grease pencil the way I try to work in Krita. You can't do it. There are other ways to do it, but you really find yourself having to think less in terms of pixel grids, in other words, areas that either have pixels or not, and you think more in terms of objects, let's say. Like this is a head and a neck and a body, and you start thinking more in terms of objects, and which forces you to plan ahead more the order in which you create things. In a perfect world, like for example, if I wanted to animate this arm, clearly it doesn't work very well if taking this arm away would reveal a big hole in his body that then has to be filled, right? So if you're thinking in terms of digital tools as opposed to drawing, you start to evolve towards the idea of saying, well, I want to create his body as a complete filled shape, and I want to put the arm on a completely different layer so that later I can animate it. What's the right answer? There is no right answer. There's two different ways of doing the same thing, and at the end of the day, it all boils down to how does it look, and did it work? You know? Yeah, Pepe Schoolland. Yeah, Daniel Lara is just such a talented guy. I mean, you can't say enough good about that guy in terms of his talent as an animator. And it wouldn't matter. I mean, back in the day when he was doing 3D in Blender, and he discovered some really cool things you could do with the normals node in the node editor in Blender in order to instantly change lighting for real-time lighting changes in 3D. At the time, it was amazing. Now, how the heck he figured that out? Because what you're doing is you're applying a normal modifier to the dot product. It's like totally non-intuitive, you know. But he came up with that, and but he was doing Pixar type art, you know, animation stuff in 3D back way before the grease pencil thing happened. So, you know, so point being that a guy with that level of skill is going to create really great work no matter what tool he's using. I don't care if he was using Krita, it would look great. So anyway, that's it for me. That's almost 2 hours, and I think I said what I wanted to say today. And we'll be moving forward with this Luka stuff, but now I got a few other things in my life that I need to go attend to that are not animation. And so I wish you all well, and as you guys know, there will be more later.